Welcome to a new podcast for Tax People Not Boring. Today we have a fantastic guest, David Gielty. He is working for a company called Atkins. He's going to explain a little bit more about that. And we've actually had the pleasure of working with David. He's got some really great insights in working both on a big international tax project and also where he's lived and the different cultures he's experienced. My name's Andrew Bohnet. I am a tax innovator, and I have with me Joe.
I work in the finance department for Innovate Tax. Been here 9 years now. Great place to work. So looking forward to this.
So I need to basically get rid of you this year, otherwise I have to pay for the gift for 10 years. Right, good day, mate. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name's David Gielty. I work for Atkins, which is a Canadian-owned massive engineering company. We have big operations around the world. We do stuff like designing bridges, nuclear power plants and stuff. Probably the most interesting thing to talk about is my weird career path that sort of got me to this point and to this slightly lavish backdrop, which was only really available because the desk was free on a Friday afternoon. I work in tax technology. So my background was originally corp tax as a ICAS chartered accountant. Did that for about 5-7 years and then slowly migrated into tax technology. It's probably a bit of a weird path into tax tech because most people come from indirect, but I was a corp tax guy and was pretty good at Excel. And now I found myself well into the world of Oracle, ERP, reporting, all of that lovely stuff.
Yeah, so just a few quick fire questions, David. So firstly, if you could only work from the office or only work from home, which would you choose?
Oh, it's quite an interesting question. I'd say, weirdly, office. And I never thought in my life I would say that because when the working from home thing kicked off, everything was so much easier. But for me, I think when I'm stuck at home, I tend to just be a potato. And as soon as I get out of the house, I start doing stuff. I do say that from a position of luxury. I live 20 minutes away, which is kind of insane in a big city. Not everyone's the same. And most of my team is remote. But I think being able to just come into a ridiculously nice office within 20 minutes really influences my position on that. But yeah, I'd say just getting out of the house, not even the social aspect of it. There is nobody here today, and I'm very happy.
Just a change of scenery helps.
Yeah, I don't want a water cooler conversation. I want a view of the city.
Okay. Next question. If you could swap lives with one person, who would it be?
If I could swap lives with someone right now for a day, it'd probably be Keir Starmer. Not because I'm particularly interested in Keir Starmer specifically, but I reckon that geopolitics right now is so fundamentally interesting what's going on that just seeing behind the scenes for a day of all those decisions, some good, some bad, how they get made would be damn interesting. So I'd certainly say if I could be a world leader for a day, and if assuming the world survives that, which is not guaranteed, I think that would be a very interesting experience.
Okay.
Something I learned from being trained in tax is that I realized when I was reading articles in newspapers about tax, especially at large companies, I could just point out technical errors. They're that's wrong. No, that's wrong. Especially with tax accounting for corp tax, it's really you got to get your head around it. It's pretty complicated stuff. And then I thought, hang on, if I understand that this is fully wrong, the thing that I'm reading in a national newspaper, what about all the other things I'm not an expert in?
Yeah.
They're probably wrong too, because this stuff is hard. And it kind of gives you an appreciation for stuff that is hard to do. And actually, I think that we tend to give ourselves opinions on stuff that I have no idea about, really. And maybe that's the nature of democracy. You sort of have to have a bit of faith in stuff that you're not an expert in.
Yes, taking that role for a day would just give you that, first person perspective of what goes on and give you a bit more of an insight into all that side of things.
Exactly.
Yeah, you've said in the past you've obviously lived and worked in multiple countries. Where would be one place that would be your dream destination for a vacation or to work in the future?
Dream destination has to be Japan. I've got quite a lot of background with Japan. One thing is I went on Japan for like a 1 year trip in 2007, stayed for 5 years, found a wife, and now I've got a permanent connection to Japan through my wife and kids. So we do actually go quite a lot. But in terms of destination, definitely for skiing and snowboarding in Japan, it is insane. I think I've seen a lot of like stuff on Instagram about like people queuing up for like hours in US ski resorts, paying $500. Like Japan has none of that. It is great. And specifically, there's a place called Yuzawa in Niigata, which is about an hour and a half from Tokyo on bullet train, and it is amazing. It's also quite cheap. So that is my dream holiday destination. The irony is I never get to go because it's usually Christmas time, so we're generally with our family at the time. So, but I'll try and find some excuse to avoid Father Christmas and go skiing in Japan.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go to Japan. It's been on my bucket list for a while. I've known some friends go and they've said it's amazing, and just the culture shock when you go over there, it's just a whole new world.
Yeah.
To the UK, and
it's excellent. It's a place where it's kind of place where there's a lot of stereotypes around Japan. Like people see Tokyo as this techno city, the countryside is like really calm and beautiful, and it's all true. It's amazing, and yeah, it's the kind of place that people go with expectations that are met, and they come back like really buzzed. So, 100% recommend it. It's not easy. It's expensive, but it's worth saving up for.
How do you get into tax? I mean, you talked about it earlier, but is it,
Yeah.
You've got into direct tax first, you're now doing sort of tax technology. What was that journey? How did you end up in that career? And is it a career that you enjoy?
Yeah. So firstly, yes, definitely. It's a good career and I do enjoy it. My path into tax was completely random. And I think it's something I really wanted to talk about because I got into tax at 28, which is like a senior citizen if you're expecting like most people to start at 21. But what I did was I graduated with a management degree, which was basically business studies. It wasn't particularly technical. And then I graduated into 2007, 2008, the financial crisis. Not a good time to be 21 searching for a job. And on the back of that, I decided to go away to Japan and worked English teaching in a ski resort, which I've just recommended, and loved it. So I was a high school English teacher for a couple of years. Then I moved to Tokyo. I became a recruitment consultant, which was like an intense sales job. I don't recommend that for the experience of doing it, but as a growth, I think it was pretty great because I think before I started that, I was relatively shy, laid back, normal person. And then you take a sort of a slightly timid British person, you put them into a Tokyo recruitment agency run by like MAGA Republicans, which was in 2010 was quite a rare thing. And it was like this intense maximum sales culture, which was not a good fit for me personally, but actually I sort of tried to adapt it and made the most of it. So I did that for a couple of years in Tokyo, came back to England, did that in London, didn't really like it, and found myself at 28 a bit adrift. And I think a lot of people, especially when the economy isn't so good, you do find a lot of people who are in their mid to late 20s or 30s or 40s who've done some things, it's not worked out, or have done a career, but they're ready for a change. And that's when I got into tax, because really, when I was looking at tax, I was looking at everything. And I had to make that decision between tax and audit when I was looking at the Big Four accounting. And that's when I think what really spurred me into tax was the political nature of it, because I was always quite interested in politics. And I think something came out when I was interviewing for like entry-level tax roles was being able to have a chat about the economy and about interest rates and inflation and stuff. Sort of triggered that, hang on, this is a job where that's not just an interest, like understanding this stuff and being able to get ahead of tax changes by understanding the political scenario is actually relevant. And that's really what led me into it. So I joined a grad scheme with KPMG. I was very nervous about it because I was 28, married. I think we had a baby on the way, which was a fun experience to be like applying for a new grad job with that. And yeah, so I joined KPMG into like a training contract. And it was interesting. I was really expecting everybody to be 21 and me just this like old guy who's done things. But actually, probably about half of the people on that grad scheme were similar background, who'd done stuff, bumbled around, done careers, and then eventually selected tax. And I do feel like from the experience on that initial training course, like training contract, the people who'd bumbled around a bit found it a little bit easier because we were coming into it's very difficult to do the exams to pass for accounting and tax. Like they are so much harder than university. And I think a lot of people coming from university found that they were like, oh my God, this is hard. Whereas for me, I was coming from, hey, I don't have to recruit people. I don't have commission that's based on someone changing their job. Like I don't need to be making phone calls. I can just study. This is a holiday. So I think having jobs that you don't particularly like and then going into something that you do like is a luxury. And I feel very lucky to have had that experience. But I think that kind of that bumbling around, eventually finding your way into tax is a good route into it. And I would encourage people who have maybe they're in a job right now that they think is kind of like not a good fit. I'd encourage them to consider tax because it is technical, but also really it's more about English language, words, communication, interpretation, not really about maths as well. But I can speak to the maths aspect if you ask.
Yeah, no, that's really like
I did make one mistake once.
But did you tell anyone? Because if you didn't, it wasn't a mistake.
Yeah, no, it's not too bad. I remember it quite clearly. If you've ever got an FX rate the wrong way round, that's not good. Because I was doing some calculation and I think I calculated our tax to pay as greater than the GDP of planet Earth, something in the quadrillions of dollars. And I didn't even notice. So until I gave it to my manager and I was like, hey, I don't think we have to pay $40 quadrillion. It's like, it's gone the wrong way. So apart from that, the maths aspect, there's nothing really beyond GCSE, so sort of beyond like basic high school math. So it's much more about being able to read, interpret, understand stuff, apply the law. Certainly for like the pure tax job before I got into tax technology, I'd say it's really something that there are a lot of people who've got English degrees or geography degrees or something like that, not sure what to do with it. I'd definitely recommend tax for anyone like that.
Do you feel that your background in recruitment helped you with regards to picking out who you wanted in that team and what elements of skill sets you needed within that team?
Yeah, I think so. I can speak to the recruitment side first because recruitment, if you work in it for a couple of years, it forces you to have social skills. It's you can't be shy, and also sort of it encouraged me to sort of think about the way that we select people and hire. And honestly, we interviewed a lot of really good people. Some of the people we spoke to were really excellent, and we did have difficult decisions between like 2 or 3 good people for the same position. But I think it was more about understanding the skill set that we needed. And then I went to IT and had a chat with them about how do you do recruitment? How do we get these skills in? And it was really just a social aspect of bringing in other experts to it and helping us to find people. In terms of how do you get buy-in to build a new team? It was tricky because I think really the way that I got into tax technology was I will 100% admit I was good at Excel, and good at Excel relative to normal tax accountants is not a very high bar. I can't develop. My friend tried to teach me Python, which was fun for about a summer, and I managed to do like a little program, but I never got that into like production.
How much of your involvement or the tax department's involvement is because of the way you potentially approach to make sure you're involved, to make sure you talk to the business, whether that's IT, business, CFO, etc., so that everybody knows that tax is important?
Yeah, it's tricky because it took me a long time to really work out what's the best way to interact with people on the project. The trick was I went away and read about ERP projects that failed because I wanted to know, not just from a tax perspective, but from a holistic perspective, like why did Birmingham City Council lose all this money? Like what happened there? Why did the US Navy lose $1 billion on an ERP project? Like what happened? How do I not contribute to that happening? And at the same time, I've got to get my tax objectives right. So originally what I struggled with was we defined system requirements into, is it a requirement that is doing the same thing as our old system? Or is it an enhancement, something new and better? And I really struggle with that, because if a new tax rule comes in, or if the old system was doing something wrong anyway, well, it's an enhancement. I've got to make that argument. And I was getting into a lot of arguments with it, and it wasn't really working. And then what I figured out was the reason a lot of those ERP projects failed was because of over customization. Oracle, in our case, is supposed to work anyway. There was a reason Oracle's a big corporation. It's because it's a reasonably good platform. So I shifted away from thinking about what's existing versus enhancement to what is Oracle best practice? Like, how are we supposed to be using this system? And that's what really made things start to make sense, because instead of tax being a kind of burden that was just randomly throwing requirements at the project, it was more, well, let's have a look at like how tax is supposed to work in Oracle. And then we work with the change management side of things to say that, yeah, tax is going to change. That also tied into us like having a tax data automation team who can help with that change. But what we wanted to do was, our old system was JD Edwards. It had things in a certain way. It had evolved over 20 years, so loads of customizations. It was pretty good. But had we tried to replicate that, we would have done so much custom code in Oracle that would have been really hard to maintain. Tax would have been doing that thing where we sort of have that decision of either delay the project massively or sign off on a system that doesn't work. So what we tried to do was figure out what's Oracle supposed to be doing? What's the way that we can meet our requirements without doing loads of customization that's risky? And on balance, like on the whole, it kind of works. It works pretty well. That works very well. But we did, after we go live, we definitely had like a hypercare support period where there's things that were just not working, and the reason was I just didn't think of it. And that's one other thing, is you can have all the charisma in the world, but a lot of the things where we've got missed tax requirements or something that doesn't quite work after is because it's really hard, and it's very difficult to sort of know when you're capturing requirements what is the difference. Because a lot of people would ask me, what's the difference between JD and Oracle? They're like, well, the tax codes look different. That's quite easy to explain. But when you get into something really technical about how accounting works and how something like Oracle intercompany is very complicated stuff, that's where it's very hard to articulate a difference, because you have to understand both systems in a lot of technical ability. So for me, there's definitely a limit on what I can do, and that's where you just have to make friends. So I think from a technical standpoint, that means being in touch with and trying to make friends and not piss off too much the IT team. But then there's also the operational side of it, because I think for tax, coming from a tax background, the thing that tax people worry about the most is getting tax wrong. And then as soon as you're into an ERP system, you realize actually tax can break everything else as well. And this was the stuff that I would really worry about, because to give 3 examples, like you have to get tax right on invoices going out the door. So if we mess that up, we don't get cash in. You've got to get your tax right on supplier invoices that we're paying. If we can't process that right, there's delaying our payments to suppliers. Tax, again, responsible for that. And the third one is expenses. So like we use Concur for expenses. Having that all set up with VAT recovery has to be automated. Otherwise, you get delays in paying your employees' expenses. So suddenly I've sort of gone from the guy who is a corporate tax guy who's pretty good at Microsoft Excel to being up at 3 a.m. like freaking out that we're not going to send invoices. We're not going to get cash in. Like, oh my God. So I think the solution to that as well is making friends with the heads of accounts receivable, project accounting, accounts payable, concur, and sort of understanding things from that perspective too, because tax could delay the project, but it could also cause problems down the line that are coming in from non-tax areas. And I did get a couple of those where it's a fringe case that we hadn't thought of. We've got to bash out a solution post go live. But for the most case, I think having that relationship between tax and FinOps, who are the people who do the billing and payments of invoices and things, was the real key. And I think once those relationships got established, everything got a lot easier. But that would be sort of my biggest recommendation to anyone in tax going through an ERP project, would be you've got to really build those relationships with FinOps, and as much as possible, try to understand their processes, because that's the points where the tax relevant decisions being made. So it's trying to understand, like, when we raise an invoice, who is making the decision as to whether we put tax on or not, and is that fully automated or partially? And the same with accounts payable. I went to Bangalore because, like, that's where our team's based. Like, I think that's something that tax people don't think of too, is when you're based in a country, and say if you've got offshore elements of financial operations, I think there can be a bit of a culture just to do some whinging, which is to say, oh, well, the team that codes invoices gets it wrong, so we have to spend 20 hours in our tax process to correct everything. Well, my recommendation is go and do training and know people by name. And once you do that, you get to see things from their perspective when they're inputting things. What pressure are they under to get things right? And when you sit down with them and train them properly, like, the tax data that goes in from the bottom of the system starts to improve in quality. And then that means that your tax processes that you're doing later on, the reviewing of VAT returns, of corporate tax returns, become so much easier, because you can sort of get reliant on those decisions that are being made early in the process. So yeah, an ERP project I really thought was going to be do a bit of coding, maybe. Not at all. It's all about the social side of it and understanding the processes. And that was very hard for me to do. I didn't always get it right at all. But certainly for anyone in tax who's facing an ERP project, or even if you're not, even if your company's had the same ERP for 20 years, it's going to happen at some point. So I think I would sort of encourage anyone in in-house tax to be building an understanding of those processes, try and get away from the law books and try to get into thinking about who is typing in an invoice, like what is our scanning tool? How are we deciding how much we bill our clients? The more you understand about that, the better your tax organization is going to be.
Yeah, you've touched on there a lot about relationships within the industry and each department. Do you think that going into tax later at 28, like you said, and having those previous experiences in other jobs gives you an edge there on how to build those relationships from your previous roles? And do you think you'd still have that like element to your personality and your job role if you'd started tax at like 21 straight out of university, like most people do it?
It's a good question. I don't think that much, because the jobs that I did were so irrelevant to tax. I think it would be very good though if someone, for example, is working in accounts receivable or accounts payable, has sort of they've reached a position in the job where they're kind of they don't really know what to do next. I would very strongly encourage that kind of person to think about tax if they're looking for a bit of a career change, because anyone coming into it with a background in finance systems would be amazing to have that into tax. I think definitely the recruitment side of things did encourage me to pick up the phone and annoy people, get comfortable. I think being comfortable, being annoying, and being not liked is great. If you can do that, you can really start to get things moving. But I think probably the people who might struggle with it a bit are where your career has just been like doing stuff on a computer without much human interaction. I think I would have struggled a lot more had I not been thrown in at the deep end with this mega, like, kind of horrendous recruitment consultancy, which I do sort of look back on with some fondness. I think it definitely helped with the sort of the building some confidence and social skills. But I think if anyone was coming into it from having experience of finance systems, getting into tax from that angle would be a big advantage if you're coming into it new. And it's something I didn't have experience of before the ERP project.
And with that, David, you said about picking up the phone and annoying people. Obviously, we don't want to annoy people. Tax gets, bad press as it is. But I suppose the point I want to try and get across, or the question I want to ask, is how often, are you picking up the phone? Because, I would say when we do projects, we say, look, you need to keep speaking to the business and IT, whether it's once a month or every other month, you need to have a meeting. So with IT, you understand what products they're buying, for example, because if they're buying a new invoice scanning solution, you're like, hang on a minute, that massively impacts tax. You can't just go and buy the tool because it has better, OCR if it doesn't do anything, for the tax automation, for example. And likewise with the business, you need to understand where their pain points are, because you could keep on getting the same bad quality data, but it's just because no one's actually told them why it's important or that it matters. You just keep on, trying to fix it. So how often, do you recommend, or what did you do to build those relationships? Do you have regular calls? Do you just take them out for dinner all the time, or, bribe them? I mean, what's your trick in building those relationships?
Yeah. Occasionally. One of the thing about it is it's very distributed. So our heads of project accounting are in the US and UK, head of billings UK, head of accounts payable is Bucharest in Romania. So these are people that you don't see often. But the way I communicate with them is I know them all really personally. So I've sort of have any opportunity to go and meet people, I take it. Even if you sort of had to make like quite groveling business cases to say, please, can I go and meet this person? It's always worth it. But I think I have direct relationships with them. So rather than having like a formal scheduled call with the billing team each month where we set things out, I just talk to Tracy. That's like how I see it in my head, is that having that communication means that they're a bit more likely to raise stuff directly, and that making the FinOps team really comfortable to raise problems, come to me directly and talk about things, I think it's a little unstructured, but it does give everyone a sort of, it's very fast. So being able to respond to stuff, because I think, trying to think of some examples of where things have changed recently. One is e-invoicing. E-invoicing is, we're looking at it, but it's predominantly a billing thing. So the way that I've worked on that is straight away go to the head of billing and sit down together, work out a plan for a joint thing led by FinOps with tax feeding into it. Having some strategy around it is always good, but I think I would definitely no longer describe us as siloed. I think the ERP project was a real catalyst for that, because the same people across the business who are relevant for FinOps and tax are often sort of in the same calls with the ERP thing. That's how you get to know them. But then my sort of recommendation is, as much as possible, try to build like good cooperative working relationships directly with loads of people. It can be a bit exhausting because you do sometimes just get overwhelmed with like different people expecting things at the same time. But I'd say it's worth it because really, if I think about my last week that I've just had, probably half of the calls I had were with like non-tax people. And I think that's a good ratio, sort of like not just sort of getting out of tax occasionally, but seeing it as a fundamental part of a tax technologist's job is to have those solid relationships and be doing stuff for FinOps. It's very, very key part of it.
Yes, with our personal relationships. I mean, here recently we've had, obviously,
Hang on, careful. What do you mean here?
Since COVID, obviously people were working from home, and then some people stayed working from home, and then it was hybrid. Now there's more people back in the office, which is always good. But also we made a point to implement a policy that if you're on an internal call and you should be on camera. So it gives that extra personal touch.
Yeah.
So that you see people actually moving and interacting is a lot more nicer to have a conversation with them than just seeing a picture of them or initials on a screen.
Yeah, actually, I think
nice to have
that ties nicely to the question I was going to ask, or comment I was going to make, because by being on camera, you can't hide. You have to be more engaged. And actually, I think when you said I'd pick up the phone to Tracy, the fact you're doing that means that Tracy's aware of you. So when she is working and doing her job, if there's something that's potentially tax related where she may never even thought about, okay, I may actually have to check this with tax, because she has that relationship with you, then she's like, actually, no, I better just check this with David because there could be an implication here. So that then means that you're preventing issues ultimately from happening. You're continuing that relationship, and you're also doing like a knowledge transfer, right? You're actually, that Tracy is learning more about tax, what matters, what doesn't, because if she raises the same, point twice and both times it's not an issue, she's probably not going to raise it again because she's comfortable that actually it's not an issue. Whereas, otherwise everything goes through loads, you get mistakes that you don't even know are happening, and then everything starts to unravel and fall apart. So I think for me, it's really great to hear how you've done it, how you brought it in, because I think a lot of companies potentially struggle. Again, maybe down to the fact that, your previous job made you more confident and more able to pick up that phone. And I think picking up the phone is very important, not just sending emails, because if you do have that relationship, people are more likely to respond and respect, what you're trying to do.
How do you get that person to learn out of these 10 parking codes that you can pick which one to pick? Is there training in place so they know which one's which, or is it something that you're going to expect them to learn themselves? Because if they're not caring in the first place to pick the right one.
And good luck getting a sales guy to ever pick the right thing, right?
So yeah, and there's also a cost to it, because we're talking about, in our context, it's usually project managers. We've got a lot of project managers who are like bridge engineers and power plant designers. Like, how much of their time can I justify for 8 pence of recoverable VAT on a parking ticket? Like, well, not much. And then it adds up to, like, say, a couple of $100,000 overall. So it's very tricky. You've got to get that balance, because I think something I try to do is be honest with myself about laziness. And I think this really got me into tax transformation, because if I offer my sort of first jobs would be, here's 100,000 lines of the entertaining code, go through it, identify any non-staff entertaining. And like for 10 lines, I'd be like motivated. And then by like line 100, you don't want to do it anymore. And then you start making your own mistakes too. So I think having that, it gives you this sort of understanding that actually you can do training, you can do all the training in the world. You can make people really, really understand stuff. But ultimately, people get bored, people get tired, people make mistakes. And I think that's where having as much automation as possible, where it's feasible and when it works, is really good and key. And also trying to have controls over stuff. So I think one thing that I'd really like to explore, I've not done this yet, but I'd like to try, is using AI as a control rather than a decision maker. Because I don't think AI is there at all yet in terms of it being a reliable tax decision maker in most contexts. But one thing I'd like to try it on would be, for example, review 1 million lines of expenses and check the VAT treatment and try and identify any patterns.
Well, actually,
I think that could be quite interesting to try and do.
When something to look into is in effect machine learning, right? It's considered AI, but it's not too like the generative, like what people think AI is. But the machine learning, ultimately, if you've got 20,000 records, it will say, right, let's review, 15,000 of those records and put, 5 side. But what it's then doing, it's looking for the patterns. So where you're saying, oh, someone's, miscategorized something and there's no real way of stopping that. Well, in this situation, you would say, okay, well, I've got 20 records, 19 have this category, this GL code, this, customer, blah, 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 and this one doesn't. So what you're then doing is it's picked up on the pattern, and that could be that actually that person did choose the wrong category. So there are those sort of tools to, as you say, to help you sort of analyze and process the data rather than using AI to do sort of even sort of more magical stuff. Really, you want to make sure your data is as good as possible. Once your data is as good as possible, then you can do even more with the AI afterwards.
Yeah, and it might be that it still requires a lot of review from the team side, but at least it minimalizes it slightly and would bring down, say, 10,000 records to 1,000 that they've got to look through.
I think for me, a lot of it, as you say, is about the relationship, working with people, not just with the people, but also the relationship you have with the tools you're using, including the ERP, to understand how those people work and what's important to them and how the system works and what the restrictions are, I suppose, and then bringing those together. But as a final sort of takeaway, what sort of one piece of advice or lesson learned that you've done that you would, lead this podcast with?
The main thing is doing stuff that is completely out of your comfort zone and just saying yes to things that you're not really qualified to do, and then frantically training yourself as quickly as possible makes your job more fun and interesting. And as long as you're mildly responsible with that, I think that for a lot of people in tax, there's probably also a lot of anxiety around AI and the future of the profession. I think that from my experience on it, it's so complex and so difficult to automate tax that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, coming up for people who are working in tax, have an IT mindset, to go and explore stuff. And I think I'd encourage basically anyone working in tax, especially in-house, is the one thing to take away from this, is go and ask why and who. Where is your data coming from, and what's the source of it? Because I think when we looked at our tax processes, often our starting point was with documented process. The starting point was send an email to Barry requesting the data. 1, then 2, unformat the data. 3, do more Excel. And actually, you go and talk to Barry, we're like, well, what do you do? And often he would say, I download it from the system, I format it in Excel into the thing that you wanted 20 years ago, and then I send it to you. And then you sort of start to realize, hang on, this entire process sometimes is based on misunderstandings and flipping data multiple times, a lot of people formatting stuff unnecessarily. And I think that anyone in tax who really sort of drives into where is the data really, really coming from, that's where your first win is your processes get simpler. And your second win is if you start to think about the sort of psychology behind why are people inputting data in a certain way, then you can really start to improve it and start to go and train people, push back on things, and even go and do some pop psychology and try to encourage people to code their parking correctly, which is one of the many things I lie awake in bed at 2 a.m. dreaming about, is council versus non-council parking. It is a hell of a career.
Yeah, I think I tend to, every now and again lie in bed. Keep me awake is a bit of an incident that happened to me in Japan, but I'm not going to go into that any further.
Yeah.
Dave, that was a great bit of advice. I think, I completely agree with that. I think that's great. You can never learn if you don't make mistakes, if you don't try new things. You just have to do it in the right way. So with that, I will say goodbye and thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you soon.